To introduce Lynsie, and again, it feels a little weird reading her bio, but I'm going to go do that because again, I work so closely daily with her, but I think her bio gives you a really great background on all of her wonderful wisdom that she is going to be sharing with you today, as well as her passion for these small steps that she's going to be talking about. So Lynsie is one of our senior health promotion specialists at Intermountain Healthcare, where she assists in administering the Live Well program to all Intermountain caregivers. Lynsie received her bachelor's degree in exercise and sports science from the University of Utah and a master's degree in healthcare administration from Weber State. She is also certified as a health and wellness coach through Well Coaches. She has worked for Intermountain Healthcare for 12 years and enjoys connecting with others as they make positive changes and find joy in their lives. Her personal mission is to find happiness within herself and share this outward with others. Outside of work, Lynsie enjoys spending time with her family, reading, and traveling to new places. Of course, in the non-COVID world, we've all probably had limited travel experience going on in this current world we're living in. So I will turn it over to Lynsie. Ooh, and you're on mute, Lynsie.
Thank you. That mute gets me every time. I was just saying thank you for that awesome introduction. I left my camera off because it always makes me blush when people are talking about me. So thank you for that awesome introduction. Like Michelle said, I am a health promotion specialist here in the Caregiver Live Well program, and really excited to be here today to talk about small steps. So since it's the end of the day, I thought it would be fun to tell a little story. We all need story time once in a while, right? And it's a story that you've all heard before, but I would say it's like my retelling of this story from a small step behavior change viewpoint. So we've all heard the story of the tortoise and the hare, and I'm calling it the tale of Hasty, Hare, and Tiny Tortoise. So Hasty Hare wanted to win the race, and to win the race, he knew he had to go big and go fast. Tiny Tortoise also wanted to win the race, and to win the race, he decided to start small and stay consistent. Hasty Hare hit the ground running, literally, as soon as the race began. He gave it his all and ran hard and fast until he ran out of steam. Then he meandered along the course, took breaks, got easily distracted because he had pushed so hard at the beginning that his motivation and energy buckets were depleted. To his dismay, he couldn't keep going at the pace he started with and decided to quit, decided to go home. Tiny Tortoise, on the other hand, did the only thing he knew how to do. He started small, and with one step at a time, he made continuous progress toward the finish line. He focused on the distance he covered with each step, celebrated every milestone along the way, and worked within the limits of his own energy level. Slow and steady, steady and slow. He exercised his muscles of patience and consistency the entire race. Now, we all know the story of the tortoise and the hare and how the story unfolds. In the end, we all know Slow and Steady did in fact win the race, and so did Tiny Tortoise. It's not always about, because Tiny Tortoise knew it's not always about who is fastest, but who is the most consistent. He vowed from that point on to always focus on small, consistent movements from that day forward. I think Hasty Hare could also learn a thing or two from Tiny Tortoise, as well as all of us. So I guess the moral of the story with all of these like fairy tales or whatever you want to call them, there's a moral of the story, right? So the moral of this story is instead of go big or go home like Hasty Hare, let's start small to go far. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about today is my new made up mantra, which is start small to go far. And I don't know if I can coin that because maybe someone else has already has that copyrighted, but that's what I'm going with today is start small to go far. I want to start just by sharing my bibliography of sorts or just the references that I used if you're interested in learning more about the power of small steps and how we can really start small to go far. So all of these books are great books that I have read and used throughout the creation of today's presentation. So if you're interested in learning more, I would recommend any of these books: Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, Atomic Habits by James Clear, So Lazy Genius Way isn't all about small steps, but there is one chapter in there that's called Start Small, and it's a great chapter on small steps, as well as Changing to Thrive by Dr. James Prochaska and Dr. Janice Prochaska. So great resources if you're interested in learning more about the power that small steps can have. So I'd like to start, when I was first asked to do this presentation, the topic came up of can you talk about motivation, habits, willpower, and small steps, and how they're all related to each other. So I just want to start by doing a couple of definitions just so we can understand. And I tend to use the word, or for today's purposes, I will use the word motivation and willpower as the same, and I just define it as motivation. So in the book Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, he defines motivation as the desire to do a specific behavior. The question is, can we rely on our motivation or that desire to stay the same, for us to always have a desire to do a specific behavior because someone else thinks we should, because maybe we think we should, or because we started the behavior at any given time? And I would say the answer is no. Here's what we know about motivation. Motivation is complex. It can be impacted by internal factors within ourselves. It can be affected by external factors and situational factors. And then there can be competing motivations within us and or even driven externally for us to do different behaviors. So motivation is complex. It's unreliable, unfortunately, because it fluctuates. And I'll show a chart in a little bit that kind of describes how it fluctuates. But our motivation is unreliable because it fluctuates from day to day, even from time of day, like morning to afternoon, and from situation to situation. We might get high surges of motivation one day, and then the next day have very little motivation. What is talked about in the book Tiny Habits is that our motivation tends to decrease from morning to afternoon. So we have our highest level of motivation most of the time in the mornings. And then as the day goes on, our motivation gets lower and lower. And so complex decisions or these specific behaviors that we may be trying to do can be harder to do later in the day. I loved this example too that was talked about in the book, is that our motivation for self-improvement or maybe goals that we've set maybe on Monday morning can vanish by Friday night. And I know for sure I've experienced that. By Friday, like my motivation is gone. I've gone through the week and I'm tired, and the motivation is definitely unreliable by Friday afternoon. So we know that motivation is complex, it's unreliable, it fluctuates. And as a result, because it's unreliable, because it changes constantly, it's not reliable for us to depend solely on motivation as our winning ticket for long-term change. So oftentimes we just think, or we just say to ourselves, I just need to get motivated. And once I'm motivated, then I'll be able to do X, Y, or Z. And what we're doing, or what we're saying in that moment, is that we're relying on our motivation to be the ticket, the key. Once we have motivation, then we'll be able to make the change. But as BJ Fogg says in his book, we can't rely solely on motivation to make those changes. So what is a habit? If motivation is the desire to do a specific behavior, what is a habit? And James Clear, in his book, Atomic Habits, defines a habit as a behavior that has been repeated enough times to become automatic. So we've done it enough times that we no longer have to think about it. It just becomes part of who we are and what we do. Now, there's this ongoing debate or question of, well, how long then does it take for a behavior to become a habit or to become automatic? And there's a lot, you've probably heard the 21 days, and I would even venture to say, and it was described in the book Changing to Thrive, that 21 days is not enough. There is actually a lot of evidence to indicate that our relapse curve, meaning that we're going back to previously held behaviors or habits doesn't actually level off until about 6 months. So that means it can actually take about 6 months of intentional effort, of intentional practice and continuing to try for a behavior to become automatic. So what does that mean? If we know that our motivation fluctuates, it's unreliable and it's really complex and we can't rely solely on motivation to make changes, and we also know that it might take us up to 6 months of intentional effort to make that behavior a habit, what do we know? And I think back to the story that I opened up with the tortoise and the hare. It means we can't go big right off the gate because we can't go big long term, right? Those big goals are not sustainable long term over time. So what is the answer, or how do we, in other words, outsmart our motivation? How do we mitigate that? And that's what I want to spend the rest of our time talking about, is how do we outsmart motivation when we're looking at creating habits? And it goes back to the moral of our story. Start small so that we can go far, because we know that it's going to take, 6 months or a long time, in other words, for us to create those habits. So in order for us to continue to have that, to make it sustainable, we have to start small. So we're going to start small, and you can call it what you want. You can call it baby steps or small steps. BJ Fogg calls it tiny habits. James Clear calls it atomic habits. However you want to look at it, start small. So set the goal small so that you can go far. And I loved this quote by Kendra Adachi from The Lazy Genius Way. She says, the smaller the step, the more likely you'll do it. The more you do it, the more you'll keep doing it, making it a meaningful part of your daily rhythm, which is what counts. So again, we know it's going to take us a long time, up to 6 months to create that habit, or in other words, to make it part of our daily rhythm. So we want to start small so that we're more likely to do it, and then we'll continue to do it. And then over time, it becomes part of our daily routine. So I want to continue to talk about, why do small steps work? Or why is it important for us to start small so that we can go far? And again, I loved the chapter in The Lazy Genius Way about small steps. I have like half of it underlined, but I loved this quote that she shared, and I want to go through each bullet point of this quote to really demonstrate, or hopefully demonstrate, how small steps can help us go far. So she says, small steps are easy steps are sustainable steps keep us moving, and then movement, progress, not necessarily the finish line, becomes the new goal. So I want to break this down and what that means in terms of small steps, kind of practically speaking. So why do small steps work? The first bullet that she says is small steps are easy. And therefore, I've added this part there, and therefore, because they're easy, they're less scary and less overwhelming. A lot of times we set a big goal, or we see a big goal, right? And it can feel a little scary, and it can feel overwhelming to go big, or to, feel like we have to go big. But if we can back the goal down and start small, it suddenly becomes less scary. But here's the key. When we're choosing our small step, we want to choose a small step that we personally are truly ready to take. If you think about physical activity, exercise, nutrition, or even finances, any goals that you may set under any of those categories can really be accomplished a lot of different ways. There are a variety of different small steps that you could take to get started. The right small step is the one that you'll do, the one that you're truly ready to take. So you want to start by asking yourself, what is the small step that I'm truly ready to take right now? And that's the right one for you. So it's the small step that you'll be ready to take, and start taking consistently, start practicing consistently. As you're thinking about that small step and what it might be, ask yourself the question of, why does this small step matter? Why is this small step important to me? And why is it important to me right now? And really thinking about that question can help with the quote unquote motivation that's unreliable, right? It helps us on those days when our motivation isn't there, but if we can connect back to, well, why does this small step matter? And how is it helping me grow? So again, pick that small step, the one that you're truly ready to make, and really understand why that small step matters to you. And then you want to make that small step so easy, it's almost impossible not to do. And this is where it can feel kind of scary. I know I said small steps are less scary, but it can actually feel a little bit scary to say, I'm going to do a small step that feels almost too easy, like I should be doing more. But that's where you want to go. You want to make the steps so easy that it's basically impossible for you not to do. And I love the example that BJ Fogg uses in his book, Tiny Habits. He chose the smallest step. He said, after I go to the bathroom, I think it was like 5 push-ups. I'm just going to do 5 push-ups. Like that takes what, 15, 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds at the most for him to just do 5 push-ups. And that was his baby step. Maybe felt silly, but it was something that was so easy, it was basically impossible for him to not do because he knew he could do it. He made it so easy. He wasn't relying on motivation. It was just easy enough for him to do. And then once you've identified your small step, you want to find a prompt, a reminder, a cue, a trigger, whatever you want to call it, that's going to remind you to take your small step. So your prompt could be an actual like timer, like when the alarm goes off, when my calendar beeps, when I, hear that alarm, I'm going to do my small step. Or it could be kind of like what BJ Fogg did, connect it to another behavior that consistently happens. Like BJ Fogg knows I go to the bathroom several times throughout the day. So that's going to be my prompt. After I go to the bathroom, I'm going to do my 5 push-ups. I think he might have even started with like 1 or 2 push-ups and has worked his way up. But the point here is that he connected it to a prompt, something that he knew consistently happened every single day. And that was his reminder. Okay, as soon as I walk out of the bathroom, I'm going to do my push-ups. So find your small step, find your why for that small step, then make it easy, make it so easy it's impossible for you not to do, and then find that prompt during your day that he calls it an anchor activity that's going to cue you or remind you to take your small step. So again, small steps are easy and therefore less scary. Easy steps. So once we've made our small step easy, those easy small steps then are sustainable and attainable. Because what did we say about motivation and willpower? It's unreliable and it fluctuates from high to low. And I know this is probably kind of small, but I like this graph because I think it illustrates kind of what happens to our motivation over time. And BJ Fogg actually has a new motivation graph, but I like this one better. So I kept this one for the purpose of today. But what you can see here is here on the vertical axis, we've got motivation, and on the horizontal axis, we have time. And we've got this wave of motivation. And so you can see at the top where the peaks are, where it's circled in orange, those are times when our motivation is super high. So when we're feeling really, quote unquote, motivated, we're feeling energy around, a specific behavior. We've really got that desire to do that specific behavior. Then here at the bottom in blue, or in the valleys, are when our motivation is low. So you can see our motivation fluctuates from high to low over time. Every day, throughout the week, throughout the months, our motivation can fluctuate. And what happens, or what we tend to do, or I know I've been guilty of doing this, is we set goals when we have high motivation, which is great, but we set the goal really big because we're feeling highly motivated, but we don't account for the times when we've got low motivation. Where small steps can come in to counter this is if we set the goal, set the goal when you've got high motivation. Perfect. Lean on that, leverage that, but set the goal small. Again, so small that you can do it no matter what. So you're not relying on motivation. You're setting the goal so small that you can do it no matter what. So we're not relying on our unreliable motivation and willpower. Why do small steps work? Because small steps are sustainable, which then help keep us moving. And when we continue to make those small steps, we make small progress over time. So small steps can actually grow over time. And in the book, Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about even 1% of progress over time really does add up. And he shared an example of how a small shift can make a big impact. And he talked about it in terms of airplanes. And I actually thought this was a really cool example. If a pilot leaving from LAX heading toward New York adjusts the heading of the plane just 3.5 degrees south, which in my mind doesn't really seem like a lot, but if he adjusts it just 3.5 degrees south from LA to New York, he will actually end up in Washington, DC, which is a huge difference, right? And I think that relates to small steps and behavior change or creating habits. We can make those small changes that may seem barely noticeable at the time of takeoff, but over time really add up, just like with airplanes. That small change over the course of the entire United States ends up hundreds of miles apart. Same thing with small steps. Those small steps are doing invisible work that over time add up to help us to get where we want to go. And then once we've got those small steps that are easy to do, that become sustainable, and then we make movement or progress, this movement or progress then becomes the new goal, right? It's really not about the goal, but really the movement and the progress and what we're learning along the way. And those small steps have the power to be really actually transformative and should be celebrated. And I loved this example actually that Kendra Adachi shared in The Lazy Genius Way. And I put it in quotes here because she said she had a goal, or she had always wanted to start a yoga practice. But she had always failed in the past at doing the yoga practice, because in her mind, she thought that meant I have to do 30 minutes of yoga 4 days a week. That means I'm going to have a yoga practice. And she could never sustain that. So she said, I'm going to start small. I'm going to try this differently. And she decided to, instead of going big or going home, she's going to start small to go far. So her new goal, instead of 30 minutes, 4 days a week, which she was never able to sustain, became, I'm going to do one down dog pose every day. I'm going to do it in the morning when I get up, or I'm going to do it in the evening before I go to bed. But I'm just going to start small with one down dog pose. That's it. That's like what, 10, 15 seconds. After 4 months of doing just one down dog pose every day, she increased her goal to 30 seconds of yoga. So she added, I don't know yoga, you guys, but I think it was called a sun salutation and a plank. And so it ended up being like, what, 30 seconds of yoga that she was doing after 4 months of doing just her one down dog. Well, at the time of reading her book, she said this, or when I read the book, it said, I have now been diligently doing this incredibly small step of 30 seconds of yoga for 14 months. In the past, if I didn't see results in 14 days, I'd quit. And the great irony is that I made progress not only in my commitment to a daily yoga practice, but also in the physical practice itself. And it didn't take 4 hours of weekly yoga to get there. It simply took the same small step day after day. And I think that really illustrates how small steps can truly help us make that movement forward and become transformative. So again, just to recap, why do small steps work? Small steps are easy. Easy steps are sustainable. Sustainable steps keep us moving, and movement becomes the new goal, not necessarily the finish line. And I know I said that all backwards, but that's just a quick recap of why small steps work. And I know we're actually running out of time, so I'm just going to conclude. I guess I could say it's a quote from me. I don't know if anyone else has said it, but I think small steps work because our own personal race toward growth and improvement is won when we shift from the mindset of go big or go home, like Hasty, Hare, to start small to go far. And I love what BJ Fogg says. Actually, it's like the opening sentence, opening line of his book is tiny is mighty. And I think that's so true. There is a lot of power in small steps. So I know that was a very quick overview of small steps, but I know we've only got 4 minutes left. So I just want to see if there are any questions, thoughts, comments.
Thank you so much, Lynsie. Right now, there isn't anything in the chat, but as I'm sharing a little bit of information and some thoughts about Lynsie's presentation, if anyone would like to add a question or comments to the chat, we're happy to read those and answer those. But I just love this presentation. I've heard, different versions of these small step presentations that you do, Lynsie, and every time I listen to it, I hear something new or in a different way that I hadn't heard before, and it really does get me motivated because I think, sort of that same way, you and I talk a lot about this, that, I do want to go big or go home, and, yoga is one thing that I've always thought, oh, that would be really good for me, I should do it. But again, I don't like taking classes, and even, we offer some 10-minute exercise classes, and yoga is one of them. And I found that, I don't think I can even put 10 minutes on my schedule to do it. So I think just seeing these examples, it's always so great, to rethink about or reevaluate how you, do all this. And we've been getting a lot of comments here, just said great presentation, good reminders. But I think one question I'd want to ask, and we can maybe finish out with if nobody else has any other questions, is what's the best way or where should you start? Because I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel like there's so many different areas that I could start and take a small step. And I know you say, pick something that you think you can stick with or that you're ready to work on. But again, I feel like I have a lot of those. So do you have any suggestions on where to maybe start, or what's the best place to find that small step?
Yeah, I would say like you said, there are probably at any given time, we all have a lot of things we're thinking about wanting to work on, like, oh, I want to do that or that or that. I would say pick the one that keeps coming up or is like top of mind for you, one that when you think about it, you are really excited. You have energy around it. It's something that you're looking forward to, not something that you feel like you should do because of external pressures or because other people have said. So pick the thing that like really lights you up. You're excited. You're feeling really energized around it. And then take that, whatever that is, and figure out how can you turn that into a really small step. And like you said, 10 minutes might feel small, but maybe that even still feels too big. Like, so take your goal, cut it in half and cut it in half again. Like really think so small that you can do it no matter what. I think even in the book, he said in Tiny Habits, BJ Fogg says, like, pick something that takes no more than just a couple minutes to start with, because then again, you're making it so easy that you can do it no matter what. So go with where you have energy and what is making you excited, or what something that you're looking forward to or really wanting to do right now. And that's where I would start. And I wish I could just like prescribe it for all of you and say, this is where you should start, but it really is very personal to each of us. So you have to go or really want to go where you're ready. So I hope that answered the question, Michelle.
That did. That was great. And I really appreciate the presentation. And it sounds like a lot of our audience does too. I don't know if you've been able to see their comments, but they've all said that this was really a great presentation. So we really appreciate you being here, Lynsie. And again, for all of you who are attending, or even if you have friends or colleagues who weren't able to attend, we do post this presentation, which is part of why we recorded it. And so people will be able to go back and watch it. And again, the books that Lynsie mentioned will all be posted if you're interested in following up with any of those great reads that she suggested. So with that, I think we will sign off for the evening. Thank you all for attending, and looking forward to our next presentation in a couple weeks.
Thank you all for having me. Have a great night.